Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, I thought I'd kick off by telling you about one of my favourite science studies. It's a little unusual study into the diagnosis of breast cancer. So back in 2015, a scientist took a group of 16 complete rookies, and they decided to try and teach them how to diagnose breast cancer based on pathology slides like this one here. So the idea was that at the end of the training period, these testers would be able to look at slides like this and tell whether they were malignant or benign. Now, despite the fact that normally it takes years to train to be a fully fledged pathologist, these testers who had never diagnosed any kind of cancer before in their lives actually did astonishingly well. So after only 2 weeks of training, they managed to get about 85% of these slides correct, which is astonishing, right? But the really amazing thing about this study wasn't the performance of the testers, it was their identity. Because these weren't medical students, they weren't strangers off the street. They were, in fact, pigeons. Now, I know it's a bit difficult to imagine pigeons diagnosing breast cancer. So what I have here, I've got a little photo here. This is proper science, by the way, people. It's real science here. This is their little laboratory. They had a little screen on one side where the slide would pop up, and they would peck on one side if they thought it was malignant, peck on the other side if they thought it was benign, and they'd get a little treat at the end if they got it correct. Now, these birds did pretty well, right? But the paper talks about one slightly stupid bird who didn't really understand what was going on. And even by the end of the testing, was just kind of pecking randomly at the screen. But if you take that bird away, it turns out that although these birds could get 85% of these slides right on their own, if you combined the votes from all of the birds together, so flock sourcing your diagnosis, as it were, thank you, more of those to come. Then actually the accuracy of these pigeons shot up to an incredible 99%. And that is a number that is comparable to what a fully fledged pathologist would be able to manage. Now, I don't think that we have to particularly worry about our hospitals being overrun by bird doctors just yet. But I do think that when there's a reason why I wanted to start with this example, because I think it actually illustrates a really important point. Because I think that we like to imagine ourselves as humans as being uniquely capable of a whole range of different things. That we're uniquely talented, really. There are some jobs that we and we alone are capable of doing. And I think that this example really clearly demonstrates that that's just often not the case. And if you can train birds to diagnose cancer, why can't you train a computer to do it too? And I think this is really something that has changed in the last couple of years. I think that we've really started seeing stories about machines being able to outperform humans in things that we thought were our job and our job alone. And I thought I'd pick a subject in an area that's traditionally we think of as ours. So I thought I'd pick an example from the world of music, something that, only humans are able to translate the emotion of being alive into song, right? And well, let's see if that's really the case. Let's see if machines have kind of come up to scratch and are as good as us now. So what I have got 2 pieces of music to play to you. Both of them are going to be chorales. Both of them are performed by a live orchestra. One of them was composed by the great Baroque master Johann Sebastian Bach, and the other one was composed in the style of Bach by a computer. And I want to see if you can tell the difference, okay? I want to see if you can spot the real Bach. Okay, here we go. So 2 options. Here's option 1. And option 2. Okay. Didn't say it was going to be easy. Okay, here we go. Right, so your job now, between those 2 options, is to decide which one is the real Bach, okay? We're going to take a vote on this. So first things first, who's not going to vote? Oh, great. A couple of people actually put up their hands. Damn. Okay, all right, so who thinks that the real Bach there was hiding behind option 1? Hands up. Ooh, interesting. And who thinks it was option 2? 50-50 then. Basically guessing at random. And you laughed at that pigeon. Okay. Well, in fact, the real Bach was actually hiding behind option 2. So well done if you got it correct. Option 1 instead was something called Experiments in Machine Intelligence. It was an experiment done by the composer David Cope. And the way that David Cope's experiment worked there was by getting the machine to use a very simple algorithm to construct that music. Now, I'm very aware, just as sort of a side note, in the work that I've been doing recently, I'm very aware that the word algorithm makes about 85% of people want to gouge out their own eyes, right? But I mentioned this at a tech conference that I was at to someone, and they agreed with me. But they added that it makes the remaining 15% of people mildly aroused. So I'll let you decide which camp you're in, okay? But the thing is that this particular algorithm, David Cope's algorithm, it actually works quite a lot like predictive text does on your phone. So the way that all an algorithm is really, is it's something that takes an input, takes it through some series of logical steps, and gives you an output at the end, right? So a cake recipe, in theory, it could be an algorithm where your input is the ingredients and the output at the end is your cake. But this particular algorithm, it works a lot like predictive text does on your phone. So the input in this instance was the vast catalogue of all of the chorales that Bach had ever written. And the logical step to get you from one part to the end was just a very simple process. All you would do is you give the algorithm a chord, and then it will tell you what chords were likely to come up next in Bach's original music. And you pick one of those based on probability and repeat that process, chaining them together until you end up with an original piece of music. So in that way, actually, this algorithm was very, very similar to those games that I don't know if you've seen people play this a lot on the internet, where you open up the notes in your phone, you seed your sort of algorithm with a very simple sentence like "I was born," and then you let predictive text complete your own autobiography for you that has been trained on the things that you've typed into your phone. Now, I thought I'd give this a go, and I videoed it, and I thought I'd share it with you, just to give you a little flavour of the type of messages I'm apparently sending on my phone. Starts off fine, gets a little bit weird towards the end. I was born to be a good person, and I would be happy to be with you. A lot of people, I know that you are not getting my emails, and I don't have any time for that. a little bit of insight into my life just there. It's good. Now, if I play you back that little snippet of Cope's algorithm, you can hear these very, very simple chord transitions going on in the background, and that really is the giveaway that it's fake. Bach's original piece was much more complicated. Here we go. There you go. That's how you spot the fake. But I think that you could argue, I think if we're being honest here, I think you can say that actually Cope's algorithm there, it's not really composing music in the traditional meaning of the word. It's more like it's taking Bach's music, it's kind of passing it through a grater and then sticking it all back together again. But I think that it really does, that algorithm does go to demonstrate how something that is incredibly simple can have these amazingly impressive results, right? Enough to fool a room full of people as to which ended up being real. And I think that, you know, the stuff that algorithms can do now is just incredibly impressive. I mean, we have algorithms that can catch serial killers. We have algorithms that can drive cars, you know, even algorithms that can diagnose cancer better than pigeons can, right? But, you know, ultimately, I didn't really want, the book that I've written and the talk that I want to give you today isn't really about algorithms. It's really about humans. It's about how we fit into all of this and really what we want our future to look like. Because I want to just tell you a little story about what got me into writing this book, something that happened to me a few years ago. So after I finished my PhD, my first job as a postdoc was a collaboration with the Metropolitan Police. And we were looking at the riots that had happened across London and the rest of England in 2011. And the idea was that we were using all the data and we were going to come up with a predictive model that if this were to ever happen again, could be used by the police to quash the unrest before it really got out of control. So we published this paper. And a couple of years later, I went off to Berlin to go and give a talk about it. It was this big kind of academic conference, and I was on stage making loads of stupid jokes, being really flippant, basically telling everyone how great it was that you could control a city's worth of people by the police. And it just didn't occur to me that if there is one city in the world where people really understand what it's like to live in a police state, it's going to be Berlin. So as a result, in the Q&A, I got absolutely torn apart. And I've managed to track down a video of this talk, and I've found a photo of the exact moment where I think I realised I'm really in trouble. You kind of see me like pleading, begging the audience. But I think that this was the moment in my career when I realised that when it comes to algorithms, you can't just build them, put them on a shelf, and decide whether they're good or bad in isolation. You have to think about how they're actually going to be used by people, so both, you know, now and longer term in the future. And of course, there's these big ethical questions like, you know, algorithms being turned and being used by police states, but there's also much smaller stuff, because I think what I've come to realize is that if there is one thing that's absolutely for sure, it's that you can't rely on people. Let me explain what I mean. And I think the most sensible place to do that is with some Japanese tourists who went on a trip to Australia, as this story will show. So, okay, this group of Japanese tourists, they decided, while they were on their holiday in Brisbane, they wanted to go on a little road trip. And they wanted to go from where they were staying, which was here, and visit this very popular tourist destination over here. So they hired a car, popped into their sat-nav, and it said, well, it's basically a straight line, which is great. Slight problem that you can't necessarily see from this satellite image is that, unfortunately, there's a great big whopping body of water between the two. Now, in fairness to these Japanese tourists, they didn't notice this immediately. Perhaps they didn't speak English particularly well and didn't notice that, you know, the word island appeared on the name of the place that they were trying to drive to. But I think you could forgive that. But you would think that once it came to actually trying to drive on water, they would know it was time to overrule their machine, right? Apparently they didn't. Now, I think this was probably quite embarrassing when someone had to wade out to come and help them. Definitely embarrassing when they had to abandon their hire car. But most embarrassing of all was about half an hour later when an actual ferry sailed past. But the thing is, I think that we can all chuckle at the silliness of this story. But, you know, I think I've come to believe that actually these Japanese tourists aren't really alone, because I think when it comes to placing blind faith in a machine, actually, this is a mistake that we're almost all capable of making. And of course, there's really big examples where we've let algorithms take the driving seat that aren't necessarily deserving of our trust. The big story about Cambridge Analytica earlier this year being a really key example. But I think if you look closely enough, you will see this story over and over again of people just giving up their power to a machine. But I think that we're all aware now that by now, you really can, if you have enough data on people, you really can work out all kinds of different things about them. So you can work out what they're going to buy, you can work out which way they're going to vote, but you can even work out whether or not they're going to go on to commit a crime in future. And that's what this questionnaire here is from. This is from an algorithm, that a so-called recidivism algorithm, that is used when defendants appear in court, and it's used to predict whether or not that defendant will go on to commit a crime in future. And it's used by judges. This example is from America, but this is something you find around the world, including in the UK. And it's used by judges to decide who should be awarded bail, and in some cases to decide how long someone's sentence should be. Now, I imagine quite a few people in this room have sort of heard of this happening already, and I kind of wanted to get your take on this. So I want you to imagine that you're the one in the dock, right? So I want you to imagine that you've committed a crime. It has to be something that you did. You've got to be guilty, right? Otherwise this doesn't work. So you've committed a crime, you're standing in the dock, and a decision needs to be made about your future. Who would you rather presided over your future? Would you rather it was a human, or would you rather it was an algorithm? Okay, let's take a show of hands. Who would rather an algorithm took care of their future, presided over their future? Oh, interesting. That's quite high, actually. Okay, and who thinks human? Who says human? Well, yeah, I mean, still the majority. Okay, who said human who doesn't mind telling us why? Do you mind telling us why? Is there a microphone running around? Can I use this one? Let's see if we can get you to tell us why. Is it on? Oh, perfect. Can you tell us why you'd like a human? What crime did you commit, first of all? I'm teasing. What? Go for it.
I would probably have a human because, you could have bugs in the computers and stuff. And also, I just feel more comfortable because I just wouldn't like it if if a computer decided my future.
Yeah, you kind of want someone to look you in the eyes as they're sending you to jail. Is that kind of thing? Who else said human who doesn't mind sharing? I'm sorry, I'm going to run up. Okay. This wasn't the plan, but okay. I'm doing it. There we go. Thank you.
I prefer a human because I think I'm of a demographic that would probably do better from a human response than a computer.
I think you make a really important point there, because I think that everybody's probably quite comfortable with the idea that humans make more mistakes, right? That there's going to be a bigger range of answers with the human than there would be with an algorithm. But most audiences that I talk to think that error will go in their favour, really. And I think that different kind of people end up with a different experience. Actually, who said algorithm that doesn't mind saying why? Let's go up here. Why not? Let's go up here. Sorry. You've got to wait for me. Sorry. There we go. Thank you.
I think I'd trust an algorithm more because they wouldn't be biased, because it would be unbiased.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I actually did this with an audience the other day, and someone put their hand up for algorithm, and I asked them why, and they said, because I work for the judiciary.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
But I think you make a really important point, right? Which is that actually there's lots of evidence to show that kind of this error that you get in human decision making is a real problem. So there's evidence to show that if you take the same case, I'm really out of breath after running, I've done this. If you take the same case to different judges, you'll often get a different result. If you take the same case to the same judge on a different day, you can get a different result. There's evidence to show that judges who have daughters tend to be a lot stricter in cases that involve violence against women. My favourite one, actually, is that judges tend to be a lot stricter in towns where the local sports team has lost recently. There's some studies that aren't, they're sort of not necessarily that popular, but they talk about how the time of day can make a difference, whether the judge is hungry. There's evidence to show that judges don't like giving too many of the same decision in a row, so that if you have 4 people been successful before you, then suddenly they become a lot stricter. There's lots and lots of stuff like this, right? Lots and lots of things like this. And the consistency issue is something that you really can get rid of if you switch over to algorithms. So, I kind of think on balance, I probably agree with the people who are slightly more in favour of the algorithms. But there's quite a big but there. And I think that that's only the case. These algorithms aren't perfect. And I think it's only the case if we can trust the human judges to know when to overrule the algorithm. Because the AI or these algorithms, they're going to make mistakes, right? They're going to make calamitous mistakes. Let me give you an example. There was a story about a young man called Christopher Drew Brooks. Now, he's a 19-year-old man from Virginia, and he was convicted of the statutory rape of a 14-year-old girl. Now, they had been having a consensual relationship, but she was underage, and that's illegal. So during his trial, an algorithm assessed his risk of reoffending. And it determined that because he was such a young man and he was already committing sexual offences, he had a very high chance of continuing in this kind of life. So it deemed him high risk and suggested that he be given 18 months jail time. Now, in theory, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that assessment. But this case does really illustrate, I think, just how inconsistent these algorithms can sometimes be. Because this particular algorithm put so much weight on this young man's age that, in fact, had Brooks been 36 years old, that would have been enough. In fact, putting him at 22 years older than the victim there, which I think by any possible metric makes this crime much worse, right? But that would have been enough for this particular algorithm to kind of tip it over the edge and suggest that this young man was instead a low-risk individual and suggest that he escaped jail entirely. Now, you would hope, I think, that in a situation like this, the judge would have the foresight to overrule an algorithm like this, right? And to rely on their own instinct instead. But it seems that judges are actually a lot more like Japanese tourists than we might imagine. Because in this case, and many, many others like it, the sentence of the individual was increased on the say-so of this logically flawed algorithm. But there is another problem with these algorithms, something that you actually spotted there, talking about kind of bugs in the system. And that's really that they don't make the same mistakes with everyone. They make mistakes, but it's not kind of uniform across the board. And I think what we've really realized in the last couple of years is that the algorithms that we've invited in to make decisions in our lives, they have these all kinds of deep hidden biases. And I think that really part of the way out of all of this mess is by acknowledging that artificial intelligence and algorithms, they're just not going to be perfect, right? And that's because they just don't understand the world in the same way that we do. They don't understand context and they don't understand nuance. And that, I think, is something that has never been clearer than when you ask an algorithm to recognize what's contained within an image. So this is an experiment. Here we go. This is an experiment that was done by Janelle Shane, the blogger Janelle Shane. I've repeated it here for you. She noticed something a little bit weird when you upload photographs like this to image recognition software that will automatically label your photos for you. So I've done this one with Microsoft Azure. Okay, here's the label that it gives this particular photo here. It says that this is a herd of cattle grazing on a lush green field. Now, I can definitely see a lush green field. It looks very lovely. But I've spent quite a long time looking at this photo, and I failed to find any cattle contained within it. And that does make you wonder, Is this image recognition software hallucinating farmyard animals? Well, let's give it another go, okay? So let's try it with this one here, this image here. This one, it labels as a sheep standing on a lush green field. It's got quite a thing for lush green fields, this particular algorithm. But okay, does it really understand what a sheep is then? It kind of makes you wonder, does it know what a sheep actually is? Well, let's try. Let's take a sheep in a slightly more unusual situation. Try that. This one, it labels as a cat sitting on top of a wooden fence. Take a farmyard animal, put it in the arms of a child. The algorithm thinks, well, that can't possibly be a living creature. Take farmyard animals, put them in a tree, and it thinks, well, they must be birds. And my favourite of all is if you take those farmyard animals, leave them where they are, but paint them pink, it thinks that suddenly they must be flowers, which is quite nice. Although, let's be honest, a far more sensible explanation for what's going on there than why those sheep are actually pink. But, perhaps all of this stuff, perhaps it doesn't really matter. But I think when image recognition is used to start to really change people's lives, it starts to become actually quite important. Let me just tell you one last story about a story of something that happened in Idaho. So back in 2014, there were 16 disabled residents of Idaho, and they received some unexpectedly bad news for the day. So the Department of Health and Welfare, they just introduced this new budget tool. And the idea with this budget tool was it was going to automatically calculate how much each of these residents, how much state benefit, each of these residents were entitled to. Now, these were people who had quite severe disabilities. So this money was essential to making sure they could keep their independence, really. They qualified for institutional care, but were being cared for at home instead. So one by one, they each went into the State Department to find out how much money the algorithm decided that they were entitled to. And weirdly, some people found out that they actually were entitled to much more than they'd got in previous years, while other people, as you might expect, ended up having deficits of sort of tens of thousands of dollars. Now, from the outside, no one could work out how the hell this thing was making its decisions. It looked like it was essentially just plucking numbers at random. But the problem was, it was kind of impossible to argue with this computer. So the people who worked for the government just trusted its output a bit too much. So in the end, the residents had to bring this class action lawsuit to have this algorithm turned over to be scrutinized. And when it was scrutinized, they discovered that this algorithm that had so much power over their lives, it wasn't some super sophisticated artificial intelligence like they'd sort of been led to believe. It wasn't this like super slick mathematical model. It was, in fact, an Excel spreadsheet. And if you'll forgive me for being blunt, quite a crappy one at that. So this Excel spreadsheet, it had errors all over the place, right? There was bugs in the data, the formulas were a mess. In fact, the maths in this spreadsheet was so bad that the judge would eventually rule it unconstitutional, right? I love the idea of there being unconstitutional maths. But I think that, ultimately, the moral of this story is that once you kind of dress something up as an algorithm or as, a bit of artificial intelligence, it can take on this air of authority that makes it really hard to argue with. So I thought that I would leave you with a much more positive example, I think, of sort of how to get around all of these different issues that I've raised during this talk. An example of where I think people really do understand what the future should look like. And I want to go back to the example of breast cancer that I started with, where I think people are doing some really incredible stuff. Now, if you want to design an algorithm to diagnose breast cancer, there are two things that you want your algorithm to be able to do, okay? So on the one hand, you want your algorithm to be really, really sensitive. You want to make sure that your algorithm catches every single last tumour that's hiding amongst that vast array of cells. You want to make sure it doesn't miss any last single tumour. But you also want your algorithm to be really, really specific. So you want to make sure that your algorithm isn't flagging loads of normal tissue and saying that it's suspicious when it isn't. Okay, you want to make sure that it's really accurate in all of its assessments. So, okay, simple then. If you want to design an algorithm to diagnose breast cancer, just whack up those two dials and you're done. Except, unfortunately, it's just not really that simple. Unfortunately, when it comes to designing these algorithms, these two dials tend to be locked together. So turning one up often means having to turn the other one down. And that means you can kind of inadvertently design something that's quite a crappy algorithm. Because, for instance, there is something, a very simple algorithm that matches this profile here, a very simple algorithm, just a single line. All it does is it just says, everyone has cancer, right? Gets 100% sensitivity, certainly, but not that much use in terms of actually diagnosing people. So what you have to do when you design these algorithms, you have to just do the very best that you can. You have to play to the strengths of your algorithm. And believe me when I tell you, these algorithms have some absolutely almighty strengths. So on the subject of sensitivity, let me just give you a flavor of the kind of things that these algorithms can do now, using an example of one of my favorite data sets. Everyone has a favorite data set, right? This data here, this is some data from something called the Nun study. And this shows the cognitive ability of 678 nuns. So this was some data that was collected by the epidemiologist David Snowden. And at the beginning of the study, these nuns were aged between 75 years old and 103 years old. And David Snowden managed to persuade these women that every year of their life, they would take a little cognitive test. So being asked things like, how many animals can you name in a minute, right? It's questions like that. And what you can see here is the data for how these women performed, right? So you can kind of get this trend of of cognitive decline as people get older, because they appear on this every year of their lives. Along the bottom there, you have the people who ended up getting dementia. And along the top there, especially the top sort of right-hand corner, that's where you've got people who remained absolutely sharp well into their older years. Now, the reason why this is one of my favorite data sets is because not only did David Snowden manage to persuade these women to take these tests every year, he also managed to persuade them to donate their brains to the project after their deaths. Now, if you're a little bit squeamish, I suggest you look away, because I'm going to show you some human brains in a second. But these are the women, these are incredibly generous women, the School Sisters of Notre Dame from Kentucky. And in a moment, you're going to see the room where all of their brains are kept, right? This wall of brains, essentially, that scientists use. Now, the reason why you want to do this is so that you can look to see whether the people who had signs of dementia in life are the same people who had signs, physical signs of the disease within their brains in death, right? So when you dissect their brains, whether you see all of the kind of lesions, all of the hallmarks of dementia having affected their brains. Now, you would think that these two things should be straightforward, right? Signs of dementia in life, signs of dementia in death. Except it turns out that's not the case. There are some people who really buck this trend. So take, for example, Sister Mary here. Sister Mary died when she was 101 years old. And as you can see from her position on this graph here, she was incredibly sharp right up until her death, doing crosswords, all of this different kind of thing. And yet, when her brain was dissected after her death, it showed all of the hallmarks of having been ravaged by disease. In fact, inside her brain, there was barely any difference between her brain and one that would appear much lower down, lower down this chart. So what on earth is going on here? Why are some people able to resist showing the symptoms when they have this stuff going on inside their minds? Well, it turns out that a clue might be hiding in another data set altogether, one that was created decades before any of these women even showed any signs of dementia. Because this team also have access to the essays that these women wrote when they entered the sisterhood, when they were 19 and 20 years old. And if you do some very, very simple analysis on the language that is used in these essays, you can predict which women will go on to develop dementia later in life. So here's an example for you. This is a sentence of someone who did not go on to develop dementia. And you kind of see the complexity of the language, how densely packed the ideas are, the sort of vocabulary that's used, and so on. And compare that to a sentence from someone who did go on to develop dementia, and you can kind of see illustratively just how different they are. Now, this is the stuff that algorithms are amazing at. looking for tiny, tiny clues in seemingly completely disconnected data sets that can make really big predictions in the very long term. So in fact, when it comes to cancer diagnosis now, the algorithms that we have can't just tell, it's not that they're just telling you what's in your body right now. They can make a prediction about your long-term chances of survival based not only on the tumor itself, but in something in the surrounding tissue that we're still trying to work out exactly what it is that they're picking up on. Just incredibly, incredibly sensitive, these algorithms, right? It's just absolutely amazing what they can do. And yet remember that sensitivity does not make a perfect algorithm. It's only kind of one half of the equation. Now, on the flip side, humans, when it comes to being sensitive, we're rubbish, right? We're totally rubbish at this. I think this is something that was best illustrated by quite a mean trick that was played by some Harvard scientists on some radiologists back in 2014. So what they did, they got these professional radiologists just to see how sensitive their eyes were, and they showed them this image of a lung. And they asked them to have a look at it. And they used eye tracking software to see where they were going. And they failed to tell them, and 83% of the professional radiologists failed to spot, that they had hidden an actual gorilla inside the lung scan. Despite the fact that the eye tracking software said that their eyes were looking right at them. And if you've got professional radiologists missing gorillas, you can imagine how many tumors end up getting missed. We are terrible at sensitivity, right? We are really, really bad. We miss things all the time. But specificity, being specific, that's like our superpower. So if you have a fully trained radiologist or pathologist, they will almost never misidentify a perfectly normal set of cells as cancerous when they're not, right? Something that almost never happens. We're incredibly, incredibly good at it. So here's the idea then. Why don't we just accept that neither humans nor algorithms are ever going to be perfect, and rather than choosing between human and machine, which is kind of the rhetoric that we get so much, why don't we exploit each other's strengths and just create much more of a partnership? And this is what's happening now in the way that these cancer diagnoses are being designed. Because the algorithm never gets tired, so let it trawl through all of that data and just highlight a few key areas of concern. And then the human never misdiagnoses, so they can come in and just sweep up and have the final say. They're playing a really active role in all of this. And I think, ultimately, this is the version of the future that I'm really hoping for. I think one where we start embracing the flaws in the algorithms as well as acknowledging our own, really. And I think one where we start taking our algorithms off of the pedestals and start treating them like we would any other source of power by questioning how they work and calling them out for their mistakes. Because I think ultimately, you really can't think of technology and artificial intelligence and algorithms in isolation. You have to think of all of the failings and all of the trust issues of the people who are using them. Thank you very much.